Most people are still using Claude like a better copy-paste box. They write a long prompt. They save it in a document. They open Claude, paste the prompt in, add a few notes about tone and format, upload a file or two, remind it about the brand voice and the client rules, and then a week later they do it all over again from scratch. And here's the thing. That might feel like a productivity system, but what it actually is a memory problem disguised as a workflow. Because every time you paste that prompt, you're not working faster. You're just repeating the same setup. And if you're a creator, a marketer, an SEO professional, a freelancer, or someone running an online business, that repetition is costing you more than you realize. So in this video, I want to show you why the prompt library era is starting to show its limits, what Claude Skills and MCP actually are and why they matter, and how to think about building reusable AI workflows instead of collecting better prompts. Let's start with why prompt libraries made sense in the first place. When people first started using AI tools seriously, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, the model needed a lot of hand-holding. You had to explain the role, the goal, the audience, the tone, the format, and all the constraints before you got anything useful back. So people built libraries, one prompt for blog posts, one for YouTube scripts, one for SEO briefs, one for client reports, one for email campaigns. That made total sense at the time. And for beginners, prompt libraries are still genuinely useful. They teach structure. They reduce blank page anxiety. They help you understand what good AI instructions actually look like. But here's where they start to break down. A saved prompt doesn't automatically know your brand rules. It doesn't automatically pull the right files. It doesn't remember how a specific client wants their reports formatted. It doesn't connect to your spreadsheet or your data source. It still depends entirely on you to copy, paste, explain, upload, correct, and re-explain every single time. So the prompt library solves the "what do I say to the AI" problem. But it doesn't solve the deeper problem, which is, how does Claude understand the workflow itself? That's the shift I want you to understand. A prompt library stores words, a Claude workflow stores process, and that difference is everything. Now let me explain two things that are pushing this shift forward: agent skills and MCP. Anthropic describes agent skills as a way to package instructions, resources, scripts, and task knowledge into a format Claude can actually use when it's relevant. Think of it this way. A normal prompt tells Claude what you want for this one task right now. A skill tells Claude how this type of work should be done every time it comes up. It includes the rules for the task, the structure of the output, reference materials, examples of good work, and supporting context. Anthropic also provides pre-built skills for common document tasks, things like working with PowerPoint, Excel, Word, and PDF files, and developers can build custom skills for more specific use cases. MCP, which stands for Model Context Protocol, is different but points in the same direction. Anthropic describes it as an open-source standard for connecting AI applications to external systems, data sources, tools, and workflows. The simplest way to think about it is this: skills can teach Claude how to do a type of work, while MCP can help Claude connect to the actual systems where that work happens. Put them together, and the picture becomes clear. AI tools are moving away from isolated chat windows and toward connected work systems. Claude isn't just being asked to answer questions anymore. It's being connected to instructions, files, workflows, tools, and external context. And for anyone doing serious, repeated AI work, that's a fundamental change in what's possible. So what does a Claude workflow actually look like in practice? Let me walk you through a few real use cases because the concept becomes much clearer when you see it applied. Take a creator content workflow. The old process looks like this. One saved prompt for video ideas, another for outlines, another for scripts, another for shorts hooks, another for repurposing. And every single time you use Claude, you have to remind it about your channel, your audience, your tone, the phrases you never use, the structure you always follow. The better approach is to turn your channel DNA into reusable context. Claude should already know the audience, the content pillars, the writing style, the research standards, the retention structure, and the format of the final output without you re-explaining it every session. The result isn't that Claude magically produces viral videos. The result is consistency. You spend less time repeating setup and more time doing the actual creative judgment work, evaluating the angle, improving the idea, deciding whether the script actually has a strong point of view. But, and this is important, manual review still matters. Claude can still produce something that sounds polished but is ultimately generic. The workflow reduces friction. It doesn't eliminate the need for a sharp human eye. Now take SEO research and content planning. The old process uses a separate prompt for keyword clustering, a different one for search intent, another for competitor summaries, another for content outlines. That works, but it creates disconnected outputs because each step doesn't really know what the previous step produced. A better workflow packages the entire SEO process as a structured sequence. First, define the audience and business goal. Then define how to evaluate search intent. Then define how to summarize what competitors are doing. Then define how to identify content gaps. Then define how to turn all of that into a brief. Claude assists at each step, but the process itself has been designed in advance and doesn't need to be rebuilt from scratch every time. That's the difference between a prompt and a workflow. The realistic result is a cleaner research-to-brief system, useful for bloggers, SEO consultants, agencies, and business owners who need repeatable content planning. But the human still has to verify source quality, check whether the search data actually reflects real demand, and make the final call on which content is worth pursuing. Brand writing is another strong example. The old approach is to paste a brand voice prompt at the start of every session. Write in this tone, avoid these words. Speak to this audience. Don't sound too salesy. And it works once. But at scale, it becomes tedious and inconsistent because you're recreating the same context from memory every time. A Claude workflow stores the brand rules, example language, preferred structure, audience profile, and review checklist as reusable context. Then when you ask for an email, a landing page, a LinkedIn post, or a campaign brief, Claude has a real framework to work from, not just a list of adjectives. The benefit is more consistent brand output. The caveat is that brand voice is subtle, and a human still needs to decide whether the message actually feels right for the moment, whether the claim is safe to make, and whether the content matches what the market actually cares about. For freelancers and agencies, client reporting is one of the clearest cases where this shift pays off. The old process involves pulling data from different tools, pasting notes into Claude, asking for a summary, and then rewriting the output because it's too generic or doesn't match how the client thinks about their goals. A better workflow defines the report structure up front, the client's goals, the tone of the explanation, what each metric actually means, and the rules for not overpromising on results. If MCP or connected tools are part of the setup, Claude can potentially work closer to the systems where the data already lives, depending on how the workflow is configured. The realistic result is faster reporting and cleaner first drafts. But the human still has to verify the numbers, add the business context that Claude doesn't have access to, and make sure the report doesn't imply results the data doesn't actually support. Document and spreadsheet work is worth mentioning separately because this is where many AI workflows fall apart. Anthropic provides pre-built skills for tasks involving PowerPoint, Excel, Word, and PDF documents. That matters because most professional work isn't just text prompts. It involves files, formats, tables, slides, and structured documents. The old way is to ask AI for text, then manually move that text into the right format. The new direction is to have Claude work with the document task itself, so the thinking work and the final file are closer together. That reduces a lot of manual formatting friction. But the output still needs review. A professional spreadsheet or slide deck can contain weak logic, formatting problems, or unclear assumptions that aren't obvious until someone actually reads it carefully. Now, before you run off to build a skill for every task you've ever done, there are real limitations you need to understand. A Claude workflow is not automatically good because it's more structured. If the instructions inside the workflow are bad, Claude will follow bad instructions reliably and consistently, which is actually worse than a one-off bad prompt. If the reference material is outdated, Claude will rely on outdated context. If the workflow is built on weak assumptions, it will produce professionally formatted wrong answers repeatedly. This is why workflow design matters more than people realize. A bad prompt library creates bad outputs one chat at a time. A bad reusable workflow can create bad outputs at scale. The stakes are higher when the system runs on its own. Accuracy is another real limitation. Claude can summarize, draft, analyze, and format with real skill, but it can still misunderstand instructions, miss context, produce generic content, or sound confident when the answer genuinely needs checking. This matters especially for SEO, marketing, business reporting, financial content, legal language, health content, and anything you're sending to a client. The more serious the output, the more important human review becomes. A workflow reduces repetitive setup. It doesn't replace critical thinking. Privacy is also something you need to think through carefully. MCP and connected workflows are powerful precisely because they connect AI systems to external tools and data sources. But that power comes with responsibility. If Claude has access to files, databases, apps, or business systems, you need to think carefully about what data is being exposed, who controls the connection, and what actions the system is actually allowed to take. Don't connect tools just because the workflow looks impressive. Connect only what the task genuinely needs. And there's a risk of overbuilding that I want to name directly. Some people will respond to this video by trying to turn every task into a skill, every process into an agent, and every workflow into a complex connected system. That's not the point. If a simple prompt works well, use the prompt. If a checklist works, use the checklist. If a basic automation works, use the automation. A reusable Claude workflow makes sense when the task repeats often, the rules genuinely matter, the output needs to be consistent, or the context is too important to recreate from scratch every time. It does not make sense for one-off tasks or low-stakes work where the overhead of building the system outweighs the benefit. Here's the final reframe I want to leave you with. A prompt library says, "Here is what I want to say to the AI." A workflow says, "Here is how this work should be done." That's the real shift. Claude Skills, MCP, files, and reusable instructions all point in the same direction. AI tools become more useful when they understand the task, the context, the process, and the systems around the work, not just the words you type today. For creators, that means fewer random prompts and more repeatable content systems. For marketers, it means brand and campaign workflows that can be reused without rebuilding from scratch. For SEO professionals, it means structured research and content brief systems. For freelancers, it means client-specific work methods that travel with you. For automation builders, it means an AI that sits inside a real workflow instead of floating outside it as a chat assistant. But here's what doesn't change. Humans still decide what matters, what's accurate, what's safe, what's on brand, and what's actually worth publishing or sending. Claude can follow a workflow. It cannot decide whether your strategy is good. It can draft and organize and format. It cannot replace the judgment that makes the work worth doing. So here's the one practical action I want you to take after this video. Pick one task you repeat every single week. Maybe it's writing a content brief. Maybe it's creating a YouTube outline. Maybe it's drafting client reports or repurposing content or analyzing competitor pages. Now write down everything Claude needs every time you do that task. The goal, the audience, the rules, the examples, the files, the output format, the review checklist, the tools or data sources if they're genuinely part of the work. If that list keeps repeating week after week, you don't just need a better prompt. You need a workflow. That's the shift, not chasing the perfect prompt. Building the system that Claude can actually use again and again without you having to rebuild it from scratch every time. If this gave you a clearer picture of where AI workflows are heading, subscribe. I cover AI tools, content systems, and practical workflows every week. And drop a comment. What's the one task you repeat most often that you'd love to turn into a reusable workflow? I read every reply.